This episode of Camera Position is brought to you by Audible. Please visit audiblepodcast.com/cameraposition to get your free audiobook download. Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 81 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, we're going to finally finish up this project planning strategy, looking at digital asset management software, or DAM, DAM software, which is oftentimes what I call a lot of software. But digital asset management software is software that helps us not only manage where our data is, but also take a look at organizing it in certain ways as well. And this is a field that has just exploded over the last few years, especially as digital photography has become more and more prevalent for us in the industry, and more products are available. And it's sort of begun to settle in on just a few products that seem to be most prevalent, most useful to most photographers. So we'll just briefly take a look at a few of those. And the ones that probably most people have, Adobe Bridge, which comes with Adobe Photoshop, when at least starting with Photoshop CS2 and CS3 and CS4 now. Adobe Bridge is sort of an asset management software, but it's really more of a browser and really doesn't do some of the asset management things that some of these other software packages do. But we can use it to look at images and to keyword images and put keywords to associate images with certain ideas so that we can search on those keywords, and that is very useful. So if you have nothing else other than that, that can be a helpful asset management software. But as we'll see here in a second, it isn't nearly as flexible as some of the other software packages that are out there. If you're on the Mac, by default, you get, as part of your Macintosh purchase, an application called iPhoto, which is in fact an asset management software package, although not a terribly full-featured one. It's not really nearly as full-featured as some of the more professionally oriented applications that are out there. And certainly for most photographers, it's probably not as good as something else that could be obtained. And the one that sort of seems to have risen to the top, or at least a couple that seem to have risen to the top, are Adobe Lightroom and Apple Aperture. Now, as I think I've mentioned before, I have the good fortune of being a teacher, and therefore I need to teach both of these software packages. So I've used both of them fairly extensively and teach both of them frequently. So I have a pretty good understanding of the differences between the two. And quite frankly, the primary difference is in approach. The two software packages, Apple's Aperture and Adobe Lightroom, differ primarily in the way in which they approach the asset management strategy. Now, first of all, fairly obviously, Apple's Aperture is only available on the Macintosh platform, and so that right away cuts a lot of people out who are not Macintosh users. And I'm not going to proselytize about platform here at all, but the Aperture does have as its primary advantage, or one of its many advantages, I think, is its tight integration with the operating system. So with Aperture, you get media browsers that allow you to see the pictures that you're working on in a variety of different other software packages like GarageBand and iMovie and so forth and so on. And that really helps quite a bit. I also am really fond of the way Aperture deals with helping me archive and manage my images over time. And I'm able to move images off to other media, to a sort of secondary hard drive. But more importantly, Aperture allows me to store all of my images right in its own proprietary image library, and that image library then can be automatically backed up using something that Apple Aperture calls a vault. And that really helps quite a bit. Now, I will also say that Apple's Aperture requires a fair amount of computer horsepower, so if you're working on an older computer, it tends to be a bit slow. but I really like it quite a bit. And in fact, I have a few copies of Apple's Aperture to give away, courtesy of some friends at Apple. And here's what I'm going to do. I've hooked up something at random.org. I didn't know about this until recently, but random.org allows me to generate random numbers. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to solicit email from those of you who would like to have one of these 3 copies of Aperture, and I'll put your email addresses into the random.org randomizer, and the 3 winners will be available through that random.org random numbers. So sort of it helps me be position neutral on giving away some copies of Aperture. But I have 3 copies here that I would love to be able to give away. So send me an email, jeff@jeffcurto.com, and in that subject heading put Aperture. And once you do that, then I can file them more easily, and in a week or so I will go ahead and do the drawing for some free copies of Aperture. So Aperture not only allows me to store my images and catalog them, keyword them, and group them, but it also allows me to adjust them. So image adjustments, basic raw camera file adjustments, or any kind of camera file. So I can adjust raw files and JPEGs with equal ease, or TIFFs, or PSDs. And one of the advantages that any of these software packages have is the advantage of being able to create groupings of images. So let's say you've done a project where you have shot 500 photographs, and obviously not all 500 of those photographs are going to be the winners. They're not all going to be the ones that you will wind up using in your eventual project, but you do need to be able to rate them so that, perhaps these are the ones that are 4-star images, and these are the ones that are 5-star images, and these are the ones that are 2-star and 3-star images, and only the 4 and 5-star ones are going to get into the project. And so Aperture allows you to create collections, or what it calls albums, that allow you to say, I only want the 4-star images inside of that album. Now you can do this manually by dragging images into an album, or you can do it automatically by having Aperture create what it calls smart albums, which is sort of a sophisticated search function which allows the software to go in and look for any picture that is in this particular grouping, and allows it to collect that into a collection, so that as soon as a picture gets rated 4 stars and you have a smart album with the criteria that says put any image that is 4 stars or better in it, then that picture ends up in that smart album. Pretty clever, and really a big time saver for me in terms of helping me group my pictures together. And Aperture does a lot more than that as well, but this is not an Aperture tutorial session, just sort of one that kind of gives you an idea of what this software package does. Now, again, if you're not on the Mac platform, Aperture is not going to be very useful to you because it doesn't run on the Mac, but Adobe's Lightroom software does, and Lightroom really sort of has emerged as the other industry standard. For many Mac users, Aperture is really great, but for many Mac users and many Windows users, Adobe Lightroom is a terrific software package, and sadly, no, I don't have any Lightroom copies to give away. I'm not as tight with the folks at Adobe as I'd like to be. If Julianne Cost is out there listening, hey Julianne, shoot me some copies of Lightroom. I'll give them away. But any case, Lightroom does very much the same sort of thing that Aperture does. It allows me to catalog the images. It allows me to keep the images organized by folder. And in fact, Lightroom's strategy is that it kind of looks at the way in which the images are organized on your hard drive and mirrors or mimics that organizational strategy in your computer or in Lightroom, so that what you see in Lightroom is essentially a mirror image of the way in which the files look on your hard drive. It's pretty slick and it's really well done, and they too also allow me to archive images off to another drive by copying those images from within Lightroom to another drive, and then Lightroom remembers where they are. And just like Aperture, just like I was describing, we can make collections. That's what the Lightroom software calls them, collections. And these collections of pictures allow me to go and say, here are all the pictures that I really like out of this shoot. I've made 500 photographs, and these are the 30 that I think are the best ones. I can rate them with star ratings, just like I can in Aperture or in Bridge. And I can collect them into a manual collection, where I drag and drop the pictures into a collection that subsets them out of the major group of pictures. Or I can set up what they call a smart collection, which is just like what I was describing with Aperture's smart album feature. It is a sort of sophisticated search command that makes some copies of images that it doesn't really actually copy them. It just sort of draws a pointer to them and allows me to collect those pictures in a certain way. Very slick, very well implemented, and really nicely done. Now, one of the other things that I like to point out to people who are considering these digital asset management software applications is not only are they really, really adept at helping you keep track of your assets, where are they, where am I keeping them, being able to back them up, so forth and so on. But here is the real kicker. For a lot of photographers, this is a big, big draw for these software packages. How many times have you made a photograph and then worked on it in your computer and made a variation on it? Golly, I like that, but I wonder what would happen if it were darker or redder, or if I made this whole side darker, or if I made it monochrome instead of color. These applications are extremely good at doing something called virtual copies. That's what Lightroom calls them, virtual copies, and Aperture calls them new versions of the master file. Now, one of the things that's really significant is that both Aperture and Lightroom leave your original file alone. They don't do anything with the original file. They only make what is called a virtual copy, or in Aperture's case, a different version of the master file. Essentially writing a small text file that describes the changes you're making. So if you're the sort of photographer who has an image, and that image you then save off as, let's say, picture of tree best, picture of tree best 2, picture of tree best 2 darker, picture of tree best 2 darker greener. You know who you are, because we've all done that at some point. One of the things that these software packages are extremely adept at is helping you manage different interpretations of individual images. And this is where these software packages, at least in my mind, become actual creative software packages, because there is no penalty. You're not actually duplicating the file. You're not actually adding to your hard drive overhead. You are simply making a new iteration, a new sort of interpretation of that original picture. It is incredibly useful, and because it doesn't add to your storage overhead, you can do it as many times as you want. So if you have a picture that you'd like to see monochrome and cropped, color intensified and cropped, you can make 5, 6, 10, 20 different versions, and they all stay with the same name, and you can add information, metadata information about these images as well. Well, we'll get back to talking about some metadata here in just a minute, but before we do that, I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about Camera Position's sponsor, Audible, audible.com, and I'm excited to have them again as a sponsor, the internet's leading provider of spoken audio entertainment with tens of thousands of audiobooks, over 50,000 titles to choose from. And I'll tell you, I have really enjoyed on some long car trips that I took over the summer and into the fall, listening to really well-read books on tape, or books on my iPod, actually. And you can play these things on just about anything, portable CD players, iPods, personal computers, really just about any kind of a player that you want to play. In fact, I'm listening to Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea right now, and it is just really wonderful. So the deal is that you can go to this website, audiblepodcast.com/camera position, and if you sign up, you get a 14-day free trial and a free audiobook download when you sign up for the 14-day free trial. And you can quit the 14-day free trial anytime you want, and really you end up getting to keep the book, which is a pretty slick deal. So take a look at that, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that, as well as in the sidebar of the blog there to audible.com. So it's audiblepodcast.com/camera position. All right, well, let's talk very briefly about keywords. Keywords are probably one of the, keywords are sort of like, I don't know, they're like the roof over your house, you know? You don't really want to have to deal with the roof over your house. You don't want to have to think about it. You don't want to have to pay for it. But by golly, when you need it to be there. And keywords are kind of like that. They're a little mundane. They're not as exciting as making photographs or dealing with photographs in the computer or in the darkroom. But keywords can be incredibly useful and can really help you to not only locate images, but also begin to draw parallels between images. Once you have images keyworded in such a way that you have lots and lots of images keyworded, you can begin to make associations by doing searches and finding images that are related to each other by keyword, but you may not have related to each other previously without those keywords in place. So keywords are really an important part of the way in which digital asset management works. And what they really are just little sort of code words that identify certain aspects of the image. And they can be fairly general, like, Italy, or they can be very specific, like, Bob Smith. And if you have, for example, lots and lots of photographs, as I do of my kids, if I keyword every one with each of the child's names that are in the photographs, then I can do a quick search and I can see the entire chronology of my kids' growing up years and all of those kinds of things. But think about what happens if you have keywords that are things like tree. And every photograph that has a tree in it gets that keyword tree. And perhaps some sub-keywords of either different kinds of trees or different colors of leaves or different types of trees, like, for example, pine trees and deciduous trees. It took me a second to remember back to my 7th grade biology class there, conifers and deciduous trees. But what if you had keywords that identified all those different kinds of trees and then were able to do searches on those kinds of keywords? So I've put some links in the show notes. Actually, I've put quite a few links in the show notes for digital asset management and also for Adobe Lightroom and for Apple Aperture, because these are software packages and concepts that take a little bit of time to learn. And keywording is one of those things that takes a little bit of time to learn and certainly a little bit of time to implement. But I think it is definitely one of those things that once you do it, you will be so happy that you have it. Because what happens is the ability then to do these smart albums or smart collections like I talked about earlier, but do them with keywords. So what if you had a smart album in Aperture or a smart collection in Lightroom that every time you keyworded an item with a particular keyword, and that keyword was saved as one of these smart albums or smart collections, that image was automatically added to this grouping. And so suddenly you begin to grow a body of work without even really recognizing that you're growing a body of work. The more pictures you make, the more pictures you tag with keywords, and the more significant those keywords are relative to the ideas behind the photographs, well, the better off your collection or grouping of images will be. And I've collected a bunch of resources on the cameraposition.com blog page that I think will be very useful to you. One of them is a website that I particularly like called controlledvocabulary.com. Controlled Vocabulary is a great keywording website, and it has a bunch of information about keywords. They'll also sell you keyword sets. You can make your own, obviously, and I think that's probably the best solution for many photographers. But they do have some keyword sets that you can buy for fairly reasonable amounts of money that are set up specifically for different kinds of digital asset management software. So take a look at that. And I've also linked out a bunch of resources for some other aspects of digital asset management, including a really excellent book by an author named Peter Krogh called The Digital Asset Management for Photographers book, or the DAM book. The DAM book, the Digital Asset Management book, and it's really terrific. I highly recommend that, and there's a link right there in the show notes for that. And then Apple Aperture, I've got a book that I recommend for that book, or that software application, as well as one recommended for the Photoshop Lightroom. So go take a look at those on the website, and a bunch of other resources for the two software applications that I talked about here, as well as the ideas of keywording and digital asset management. I think you'll find them all pretty useful. One last little snippet for this episode of Camera Position. Just a quick announcement. I'm really thrilled to say that the Lenswork Publishing Company, Brooks Jensen over there at Lenswork, and Maureen Gallagher and Crystal Hickok, have combined to make a beautiful object, a portfolio, a small folio of images of my photographs of Italy. Some of you who've been following the podcast and me for a long time may recall that I was really honored to be published in Lenswork magazine in 2005, and Brooks asked me if I would be interested in participating in their folio project. So there is a 10-image folio, really a beautiful little object that is available from Lenswork, and just a beautifully done, beautifully produced folio of small prints, somewhere that's sort of in between the limited edition large prints that I sell and the magazine that was published in 2005. Really very high quality inkjet prints on rag paper, actually the same ink and the same paper that I use to produce my very large prints, and this has been used to produce the smaller prints. And so I'll put a link here in the show notes to the Lenswork Folio, Evidence of Hands on Stone, the Italian portfolio. So go check it out and tell me what you think. So thank you very much for joining me on this last of the project planning roadmap podcasts. These have been fun to do, but my objective now is to get back to talking about the more cerebral parts of photography, or the more creative parts of photography. Although I really hope that you found that this planning process roadmap idea has helped you in your creative process, has helped you kind of wrap yourself around the idea of working on a project. And I think that's really one of the most important things that a photographer can do, is not only work on a project, but do it in a mindful sort of way. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Camera Position is a proud member of the Photocast Network, your photo resource in the potosphere. photocastnetwork.com